Greetings, people of the interwebs. Jake here, and welcome to another episode of the Pace of Hell podcast. And joining me today is local entrepreneur, musician, and overall swell guy, Eryk Howell.
Hello. How are you guys? Hopefully well.
So we've known each other for a few years now. I think it's like 2016. I think it's when we first met at Will and Alicia's annual Halloween party.
Yeah, I'd say so, because...
So it wasn't until like January of 2017 that I joined your D&D table.
Yeah, it has to be 5 or 6 years. That's crazy.
I know.
It's a lot of games.
Yeah, it really is. Which I think I've told you this before, but I know like when I initially was invited to that to your table, because I don't think like I put two and two together. Like you were the same Eryk that like because John and Alyssa were the ones who invited me over to play. So I was like, I don't think I'm gonna know anybody there outside of those two. And I've got a lot of like social anxiety, so I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to go because like I don't know if like I'm gonna mesh well with them, because that's a big thing with D&D. For those of you who don't play, is like sometimes you don't always mesh with like the table you're at.
And that is definitely a true statement.
But thankfully, like as soon as I arrived, I was like all that like anxiety like was immediately like washed away, because I at least knew some like all of you all to varying degrees because of basically Will's your Halloween party. Like you, I'd met again back in October. Hayden, I'd known him since the first time that I went, so he was one of those people who were like, oh, okay, yeah, I know you. Like Dart and Fluff, like basically everybody there except for Dave was the only one that I didn't know. So I was kind of immediately like, okay, these are my people, because all of us are a bunch of like nerdy metalheads.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
Yeah, which I'm sure we'll get into, but first. So obviously we knew each other, but for the listeners who may not know you, and like I said in the last episode, so before I started this podcast, I invested millions of dollars on the top research team to devise a series of questions for my guests, so that way the listeners, not readers, I don't know why I almost said readers, that would be a terrible...
Reading with your ears.
Yeah, reading with your ears. But yeah, so invested millions of dollars in research team for the best questions, so that way once people... hear your answers. They can walk downtown. They'll see you on the street, be like, Eryk Howell, I know this guy. So, that being said, are you ready for the questions? And
I hope. I didn't study, so...
Fine, it's a pop quiz. So, first question: what is your third favorite dinosaur?
Third favorite dinosaur. See, these questions are difficult for me because I don't necessarily have favorite things, and that's kind of a quirky part of my personality. I enjoy things as a whole, like whether it be, looking at your bookshelf here, whether it be Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or The Witcher. I enjoy fantasy in general. Do I have some things that I prefer over others? Yes, but I don't think that they are like unequivocally my favorite. But dinosaurs, third favorite. I always was partial to the Ankylosaurus.
Oh, okay.
So, just because they were that whole branch of the herbivores, from what we understand about them, and I'm not trying to sound ignorant to the subject, but I'm definitely not any kind of archaeologist or paleontologist. They were, other than the Stegosaurus, they were one of the most brutal defensive herbivores out there. As long as you left them alone and stayed in your lane, they didn't care.
Yeah.
So they just did their own deal. And yeah, everybody likes Triceratops or Tyrannosaurus Rex, but I like the weird ones that nobody really reads up on.
Very nice.
And that follows more with my personality. I don't like what everybody else likes. It's almost like a force of habit.
Nice, I like it. Okay, next question. If I came into possession of the One Ring of Power, would you join me on my fellowship? And if so, what would you offer? Because Aragorn offered his sword, Gimli his axe, Legolas his bow.
I would offer my endless sense of sarcasm. No, in all reality, if it was you, knowing you as long as I have now, yeah, I'd go with you. Plus it'd get me away from my kids for a little while. No, in all seriousness, no, I'd go with you, and I think I've got a pretty stubborn, bullheaded in a positive light, almost like Samwise. So I think I could lend that to the adventure.
Nice. Very
I'd keep you on the straight and narrow.
That's good, because, yeah, again, with my social anxieties and being very neurotic, I'd be freaking out. Everyone would be, like, slapping me. It's like, quick, just shut up!
Yeah.
Shut up! Go that way! Just go
like
that
the
way!
guy, I'd be like, shut up and eat this lamb bread. You'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Jake, eat. Shh. That ring okay? Eat the bread.
All right. So, now that we... I've already forgot the fourth question. Probably should have written this down. So we'll just skip to the third and final question. The easiest one, because I've thrown you some curveballs with those first two. So last and final question. What is the meaning of life?
42.
Nice.
It's been proven. I mean, it's written in the scripture that it is 42. Just don't panic, and you'll be fine.
It's a very good answer.
Always carry a towel.
Oh, now I remembered. I don't know why, I just don't remember the fourth question. So, ranch or blue cheese?
Blue cheese.
That's not the answer we were looking for, but I'll take it.
I like both. Ranch is called for, say, with fresh French fries or fresh cut fries, fresh potatoes. Ranch all day. But if you are doing true buffalo wings, for my palate, this is one of those things that I will definitively say. I love fresh blue cheese that's been made, like from scratch, or as my kids say, out of scratch. That with freshly made chicken wings that are done with a proper buffalo sauce, that flavor combination, the crispy with the salty with the sour, you just can't beat it. You really can't.
Okay,
I've been spoiled too, so I can't really. I'm biased.
So now that the questions are out of the way, and again, like I guess we've kind of given a little bit of insight into our friendship and some of our interests, because like I said, we're kind of all, especially me and you in particular, I feel like we're the kind of metalhead fantasy nerds, because we've spent many long hours after D&D games just talking about like one or the other or both, because there actually is a lot of overlap, because like there's so many bands where they have songs or even albums based on like fantasy and sci-fi literature.
I can't remember the name of the band now off the top of my head, but I was introduced to them recently, and their entire dynamic is based off of writing their albums to the Dune books.
I think the band is Dune.
They may be Dune.
Where it's spelled like D-V-N-E?
It may be.
Okay.
I'm terrible with names. You know this. But listening to them, you feel like you're on Arrakis experiencing the movie, and they strive to have that sound. So you're absolutely correct. And a lot of people don't realize, like, especially being a musician myself and having toured and all that, the things we talk about in the van or backstage, it's not how cute anybody is in their outfits out front. It's not how much the other bands suck. It's mainly like Star Wars, RPGs, video games, and what our favorite beers are to drink while we're doing said things. So it's wild. A lot of these bands, I mean, heck, the band Goat Whore, talking with them at their show I went to recently, the guitar player's like, oh yeah, we play D&D all the time. And it's like, you guys literally just did like a Satan worshipping like pagan ritual on stage, which I know that's two completely different things, but it's like you did this huge pentagram lit up in red on stage, and then you're just like, hey, yeah, man, let's play some D&D, which I guess that lends itself to the stereotype of Satan worshipping RPG players. But
again, also, like, again, even D&D kind of goes hand in hand, because like I feel like, again, there are a lot of like metalheads who, again, since they like fantasy, whether it be like fantasy literature or other bands who sing about fantasy, because I mean, even Led Zeppelin had songs about like, you know, Tolkien.
Oh yeah.
Then you know, Blind Guardian have a whole album called Nightfall in Middle Earth, which is an album about the War of the Jewels.
Yep.
They've got an album. I think they've got a whole album about Wheel of Time as well.
The content is the band 3 Inches of Blood. If you look at their discography, especially the first couple of albums, I think there's a song called Destroy the Orcs, and the whole song is about a battle with a whole war band of orcs, and what happened in the middle of the battle. I'm surprised nobody's done anything about the Battle of the Bastards from Game of Thrones. That would be an excellent bit of inspiration for a song. I
would not be surprised if someone has that now, because I do know like some bands who have songs based in like, you know, George R. R. Martin's work. I definitely feel like his I mean, the first Game of Thrones book, I think, came out in like 94, 96. Like, they've been out for a while and had like a huge following. But obviously, once it became a TV show, that's when it really, everyone was obsessed with Game of Thrones.
The thing that bothers me, and my wife shares this sentiment, is he needs to shut up and focus on finishing Song of Ice and Fire.
Because he's, supposedly, last I heard, he was, halfway done with Winds of Winter. And that's not even the last book. The last book's supposed to be Spring, something Spring. Children of Spring, maybe. And he's a notoriously slow writer anyways. He's, in his 70s. He's a little heavyset, so it's the odds are stacked against him, so it's And I do like his... Because, House of the Dragon, I think it's a fantastic show. I've really been enjoying it.
Caught up completely on that right now.
Yeah, I just watched the newest episode today.
Excellent.
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and say this. My favorite two characters are the King.
Viserys, yeah.
Yeah, Viserys. The actor was top-notch.
Oh, yeah.
The writing for his character was top-notch. Even... And I'm not going to spoil anything depending on who's seen what at this present moment. Now, if we were a year or two down the road, yes, I'd be spoiling it all day. But there's a lot of people still haven't even started watching it.
Get on that, people.
Yeah, his acting from episode 1 to episode 8 is some of the best fantasy acting I've seen ever. And then in this last episode, and again, Rhaenyra?
His daughter?
No,
or the queen, or the woman who is supposed to be queen.
Yes.
Rhaenys.
Yeah, Rhaenys, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
That scene with her and the dragon.
Badass.
Yeah, she just looked at all of them like, look.
Yeah.
I'm letting you know right now, I could end all of this. Yeah. And then...
And speaking of Viserys, I think my favorite episode so far in the entire show, we still have one episode left, but was... I think it was episode 8, where basically he gets the whole family together because he realizes there's a schism between them. He's like, look, I'm dying, cut the shit, we're a family.
We're going to have dinner, damn it.
Yeah, we're basically having a Thanksgiving dinner. And I like that, for a little bit.
All of them respect his wishes.
Yeah. And then before that, when he's... I guess, mild spoiler if you haven't been watching the show, but, King Viserys... is at this point he's kind of failing in his health, so he's barely able to walk up to the Iron Throne. And I love when the guards are trying to help him. He's like, no, nobody help me. And he stumbles, crown falls off. And I love Daemon walks up to him and
his brother.
Yeah, because they have a lot of they butt heads a lot. But yeah, there is that deep love and respect for each other, even no matter what they've been through, and they've almost come to blows.
They are polar opposites.
Yeah,
but they respect one another because of it.
And that was, for me, that was the most powerful scene in the show. Is when Viserys says, "No, don't help me." He looks up, sees Daemon, and then he's just without words.
It's okay.
Daemon helps him up.
Because Daemon wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, and then
for anyone else.
Yeah. And then Daemon puts the crown back on his head and walks, again, there's no words, but the acting that they portrayed with just facial expressions.
And the thing is, Daemon, the actor that plays him...
Matt Smith.
Yeah, Matt Smith is awesome. And you go back to any of his other acting, and you can see touches of it in his character. It's just watching that. And I know your thoughts on Rings of Power, but you compare the two. And honestly, where I haven't read, the Silmarillion... I haven't read the First Age stuff like you have.
The best stuff in Tolkien's work, in my opinion.
I'm not disagreeing, but the way from a non-reader standpoint on that, because I've read the standard,
the books.
The Hobbit and
Lord of the Rings.
The regular Lord of the Rings books. From a non-reader of that book, it was very much okay at its worst. And then at its best, there were some moments that were just
great. They were really great moments.
Cinematically, it was gorgeous, but the writing, and I even posted this in a couple of groups online and got torn apart for it, but it was people with way too much money that hired writers that had no knowledge of the source content, that didn't respect it or even read up on it, and then hired people to advise them on their mistakes.
So supposedly, the showrunners, they were big fans, but they've been trying to they've had 10 years, I guess. I don't know if that's the whole time they've been working Hollywood, but basically in that 10-year period, they were writing scripts for movies, and none of them got picked up. And their biggest claim to fame was that J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie that was supposed to have been the fourth one in his reboot franchise, but they got canceled. So literally everything that they've written has never seen the light of day.
And I gotta say, those new Star Trek movies are actually pretty damn good.
I really like them. But
just the take.
I think, like, this show would have been better had they picked more experienced showrunners. Because I do feel like, not to say that, like, these guys don't know what they're talking about, or, are not passionate about Tolkien, although they definitely make some questionable decisions, but... that's a whole other podcast I could do just on Rings of Power, my thoughts of the good and the bad.
I think our last couple of games, we've at least dedicated an hour or two each for all of us debating.
Yeah, because it's like I bottle like all my thoughts up, and then it's like as soon as I sit down at the table, I'm like, here are my thoughts.
Now, a question I would ask right now too, which I thought about the last couple of times we started talking about movies and whatnot, not on stream here or a podcast. So. Right now, we are in an age, and they even talk about this in She-Hulk, we're in an age of high quality television, where before, HBO, like back in the day, you had The Wire, which I'm actually watching for the first time. I'm on the third season. Excellent. It's very dated because it's set in the early 2000s, but it's just good. The acting's good. The actors they have in it are good. But you had things like Oz, and then 3 years later, you get The Wire. 2 years after that, you'd get Band of Brothers. And I'm sure that timeline's completely off that I just stated. But you had good TV sparingly. And you had to pay for a premium channel to access it. So starting about 10 years ago, AMC comes out and just drops a bomb on all of us with Walking Dead.
Yep.
And
Breaking Bad, too. I feel like Breaking Bad was also one of the, that's when... TV had kind of been teetering towards, getting more movie quality in terms of, the writing and acting and stuff like that. But I definitely feel like... I think
Breaking Bad blew the doors open.
Yeah, because I think that really set the standard for, a TV drama that wasn't, your procedural cop show or, whatever. A non-procedural show, of just a pure drama, very character-driven.
And the only reason I did them off order is because I got into AMC because of Walking Dead. And then I heard a lot about Breaking Bad. So
I didn't watch Breaking Bad until probably the last season. And I was getting caught up on Netflix because, again, same thing. I'd heard all this, great, praise about it. So I was like, look, I feel like I have to watch the show now.
Oh, yeah. Bryan Cranston was actually credited by Anthony Hopkins as being the best actor he'd ever seen. Because of the character development between the first seasons all the way up to the last.
Yeah.
Because if you really do sit down and binge it, you watch him change his acting style, how he even holds himself in character. It's wild. Bryan Cranston is just... It's nuts, because I remember the first time I ever saw him was in Saving Private Ryan.
That's right, he was in
the
that
very
movie.
beginning.
Yeah.
The very beginning of it. And seeing him go from that to the dad on Malcolm in the Middle to... meth-making drug dealer,
ruthless kingpin, basically.
Say my name. It's just that show in and of itself is just excellent, and I actually have taken a few cues from the Walter White character to actually build some NPCs in my world, and it's. But I guess coming back around to the whole thing I was going to bring up, you have. Before Breaking Bad, Walking Dead, you had maybe once every 3 or 4 years, people in the 90s, you had Dallas, I think is what it was called. You had Lost, which was critically acclaimed. I watched it and I tried to binge it. It was okay, and I could see where it got its awards, but it was good for the time that it came out.
I really enjoyed it, but again, I also didn't watch it until it had been over for several years.
Same.
And again, on Netflix. And I think it actually... I think I might have enjoyed it more because I was able to binge it.
Imagine waiting
a
week in between some of those plot points. The first 6 seasons were solid. And then it got to where they came back to the mainland, and that's when it got weird.
Which I think, all things considering, because I do know that the original writers, I think during the writer's strike, a lot of them left. So I think they actually did a pretty good job of carrying over, I guess, what there was left of that original kind of storyline that it set up. But yeah, totally
it wasn't bad by any means.
Yes.
It's
maybe a little anticlimactic in some ways, and a lot of unanswered questions and some
it suffered from the Marvel syndrome, where you have something like the Marvel Universe, and I call it the Marvel syndrome because the Marvel Universe You have so many movies that at their worst are solid, good movies.
Mm-hmm.
But because you have such huge production value, such great writing, which some would debate the writing, but I'm sorry, you're making a movie about comic book characters. Don't overcomplicate it. They did that in the 90s, and all those movies were trash. As much as I think it was Sam Raimi doing the Spider-Man movies in the early 2000s, you look back on it, and they're extremely campy, but he added too much to the character. If he had kept it campy as in Spider-Man, it would have been a whole other ballgame. But digressing, Marvel, when they hit it out of the park, it's almost 99% of the time. They're Babe Ruthing it with their action movies. So when they make a subpar movie, that's not a 10 out of 10. It's still an 8. But in the scheme of things, it's like, man, that sucked. Well, wait a second. It was actually pretty damn good. Had this come out by itself, everybody would have loved it.
And I think, honestly, like, that's kind of our problem with Marvel right now, is, like, they're just spitting out so much content that, like, one, it's hard to keep up with. And also, this is, like, coming from someone, like, I do love comics, or read, more indie than, like, Marvel or DC, but I do love, a lot of these Marvel characters and stuff. But with, like, so many movies and then TV shows, that's hard to keep up with. And then, two, it's just, I feel like they're oversaturating, because it's kind of like, where do I even start now?
Well, right now we're post-pandemic.
Yeah.
Well, we're still in a pandemic, which a lot of people don't like to acknowledge that, but we still are. We're just learning to live with it. It's a post-pandemic purge. So you had all of this content, even going to the problems with Black Widow, that was just compressed, like, oh, let's keep it, and now they've let the lid off the can, so to speak, and it's all exploding out at once.
Yeah, that is a good point, too.
So we had 2 years that we would have gotten 6 or 8 things. So now in the last year and a half, we've gotten like 20 things. Yeah. And they're still stacking up. Like, they just released the teaser trailer for Ironheart. And
I haven't seen that yet.
It's awesome. I'm an Iron Man aficionado, so that's seeing it. It's just the protagonist who's working on her armor, and she fires the arm off and flies off screen like Tony. All you hear is "Let's go!" and that's the teaser. It's great. I already like the direction they're going with it. Just like Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. I love that Shuri was who they teased to be the new Black Panther. I love that, because that's even what happened in the comics. Yeah. And the actress that plays her is fantastic, in my opinion, as well. So I think they could do a lot with her character. And that's, I don't know, I'm an old school comic nerd. So I'm happy with any of them that come out. I'm sitting there happy eating my popcorn in the theater. I don't care.
And again, we are like kind of living in the golden age of like everything nerdy, from like sci-fi to fantasy comics. Oh yeah. So it's like what was like your kind of first introduction to like the like actually fantasy and kind of heavy metal? Since again both of those again kind of interconnect with each other, as we've covered.
Well, my mom and dad were metalheads, 80s metalheads.
Nice.
Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Queen, Black Sabbath, all of that was played in the house constantly. Stevie Ray Vaughan. My dad was big on guitar, so he was more leaning toward Priest and Van Halen, where Mom was into the slightly heavier, and still is, which is actually kind of funny, but that's a whole podcast in and of itself if we were to start that. But I had heavy metal at home, like old school heavy metal, the greats. Yeah. So naturally, I evolved into discovering, Megadeth, Slayer, Metallica, Anthrax, the big four at that point. And that branched off, of course, because nu metal was big in the late 90s, early 2000s. So that gave way to Korn, and then all your radio popular, quote unquote, stuff that you kind of have to trudge through to discover the heavier kind of hidden stuff, which is then when I found Lamb of God, and then got deeper and got into Cannibal Corpse or Cattle Decapitation. So that was just like it's a snowball going downhill. It just gets more and more and more. Again, probably a whole another episode discussing just how you would snowball effect into loving metal if you do.
And I would definitely be down for that, because
let me know when.
Yeah.
The granddad and my pop, he was a jazz fusion bass player.
Ooh, okay.
So you'd have this juxtaposition of being at home and Mom blaring Queen and Dad playing Priest, and then I go over to my granddad's place and he had a whole studio set up in his garage. He had nicknames for me and all the other grandkids, and we'd all run around his studio while they were playing, and it was so different. Being exposed to both of those really, I think, made me a well-rounded listener when it comes to music. But then you get into fantasy. So my pop, as a good segue, was actually who got me into fantasy, because he would tell me stories about the Terry Brooks books that I've introduced you to.
Yeah, Shannara Chronicles.
That was my first big exposure, even before Lord of the Rings, to fantasy. So I remember being in 6th grade and being that weird, nerdy, fat kid that was reading fantasy novels in the back of the bus and getting picked on, which, screw those guys. But it was my first foray into nerd culture as a whole, which I already like sci-fi and Star Wars, but this was like everything I loved about all of my sci-fi stuff rolled up into like sword and sorcery and fantasy.
Yeah, that's essentially what Shannara is. It's basically fantasy, but it's essentially a post-apocalyptic like world, our world, and that is one thing that I did really like about. See, even though I didn't love the first Shannara book. I liked it fine.
Oh yeah.
But
as I said, the first 3 are the roughest to get through, but they progressively get better.
Yeah.
My favorite of the 3 is the Wish Song, but I'm sorry.
But I do like the way that he explained how the fantasy races came to be. Basically the dwarves, after nukes went off and stuff like that, they kind of tunneled into the caves and underground and stuff like that. And I think same thing with the gnomes as well. And so obviously, if you're in a smaller compacted area, you're gradually going to grow smaller and
through
more
evolution.
Yeah.
Whoever's the smallest and most stout will probably survive better underground.
And then the trolls have the
thick bark-like skin.
Yeah,
and that's because they went up to the mountains and lived there in the middle of all the fallout.
And then elves have been here since the beginning, and I don't know if it was either the way it was described in the book or the way you described it, when you're first kind of pitching the book to me, is if you're walking through a forest and you find yourself at the entrance of the forest. I don't remember how you got there. Or
you're back at your car all of a sudden. That was the elves redirecting you away from their realm.
Yeah, it's kind of hey, you're getting a little too close. Why don't you go over there?
Yeah, and you won't remember it either.
Yeah, subtly just kind of moving you along your way.
So the fascinating thing about those books, I've talked about them at length. I think I am with Brooks and Shannara as you are with Lord of the Rings, which is why we get along so well. So there's a couple of books that actually explain in depth how people started turning into the different races. So without ruining anything, if you ever decide to read the books, there's a couple, a boy and a girl and they're teenagers that have been living out in the elements. And this book takes place 50 years after the demons reveal themselves and start to try to take over the world, which for those that don't know, that's kind of how the world ends in the Terry Brooks books, is one day in our current world, demons reveal themselves all over the globe to be heads of state, people running countries. We're talking about all over the world, and they immediately basically try to subjugate the human race. It starts the Great War. Yeah. But this is actually at the end of the Great War, and most of the protagonists are all this group of children called the Ghosts that live underground in Seattle. One of their characters, his name's Panther. He falls in love with another teenager, and she has this rash that's slowly growing up her arm. And it almost is, they explain it as almost like either eczema or plaque psoriasis is almost kind of how it looks, but after a couple of months it gets even thicker and starts to turn into something like scales. And it's from the radiation that she's been exposed to. Her family lived out in the elements. Yeah. By the end of the book, she wakes up at one point and her skin is peeling off and she has thick bark-like skin and she's starting to get a little more muscular and she's an early troll. Cool. They call them the lizard people because of how the scales look on their skin. And that's not what they are. Yeah. But if you think, how would you react to seeing somebody that's 3/4 covered in scales?
Yeah, you'd probably think they're like a lizard or something like that.
And that's the precursor to the trolls later in the books.
Yeah. And that is one thing that I did really like about the reading the first Shannara book is, again, I like the way that Terry Brooks world builds. Because I feel like in some ways it's very simplistic.
Very much so.
But
it's easy to digest.
Yeah, easy to digest. And there are definitely some moments where where he is like laying it all out on you, but that's not uncommon for a lot of fantasy authors.
No.
Because even Tolkien like went into so much detail about the world and stuff like that, which I appreciate. But then other times, like, okay, we got a ring to destroy. Let's kind of move this thing along.
Well, to be fair, he basically created an entire series of languages.
Yeah.
And then decided to write books to give those languages a home.
Yeah, because he kind of like worked the opposite, where most fantasy writers kind of come up with the world, and then the people to populate the world, and then the language that people speak. Whereas Tolkien's like, I've got all these fictional languages. I actually could come up with people to speak these languages, and it's like, okay, so I got some elves, I got some dwarves. Well, now I need a world for these people to live in, and then that's Middle Earth. So he kind of
what makes it fascinating.
Yeah, And I like that too, like learning about the different writing approaches of like some of my favorite fantasy authors, because again, Tolkien started from like the micro level to macro, whereas most authors go from like macro level. Again, like they have the world, and then they scale it down to the micro level of like, okay, we've got the world, got the people, got the languages. Here's the how they all work and stuff like that.
A good example of Brooks. Now, a lot of people know this, but his Sword of Shannara was released in 77, and latter 77. Mm-hmm. He actually finished the book because of how much Star Wars inspired him.
Which I could definitely tell with my two favorite characters, Penniman Creel and Kelset.
Kelset.
Yeah.
To this day, he was my grandfather's favorite troll ever in a book, and he is mine. There's a scene, for those of you that are possibly going to read The Sword of Shannara,
which I would recommend, because even though it's not like my favorite fantasy
definitely
book,
not even the best.
It is still
it's
definitely worth a read.
It's the largest book in the series, and it was his freshman effort, so he had a lot of lessons to learn. But give you kind of a precursor and spoiler alert in case you are planning on trying to pick it up. Mute your whatever if you're listening to this. There's a scene where so trolls are like 7-8 foot tall, bark like skin, can basically pick you up and rip you apart because of how strong they are. Kelset is mute and follows this very dashing, charismatic, one-handed kind of Han Solo character with a pike for a hand named Penniman Creel, who wears a scarlet red suit. But Kelset never says anything. He kind of signs, and he could easily break Penniman in half without even thinking about it, but he silently is just his counterpart, very much Han and Chewie.
Yeah.
But one of the main bad things in the book are skullbearers. And these things take on wizards in hand-to-hand combat and almost win. And wizards in any world, like, say, Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, there's a character in Shannara named Alanon, who's basically their Gandalf in the first 3 books. And one of them takes on basically a Gandalf-esque powerful character, like a Balrog, hand-to-hand, and almost wins against him. Kelset has no magic. And you don't really know a lot about his backstory, but they come across this just field of battle where there's dead elves and dead bad guys, we'll say, without ruining too much more. And one of the skullbearers is searching the dead for something. He looks up and sees Kelset from about 50 yards away, and he just says Kelset's name, and when Kelset hears it, he literally dashes 50 yards and basically shoulder tackles the damn skullbearer and starts to beat the living crap out of it with his bare hands.
Because that's one thing that again Brooks did really well with this book, is setting up how one powerful and also just how terrifying it is to see a skullbearer out and about. Because throughout the book, they're early in the book, I would kind of compare it the skullbearers are kind of like the Nazgul in Lord of the Rings, where they're this
that flavor,
this presence where you don't know a whole lot about them, you just know they're bad, and everyone's just kind of oh shit, we need to get away from that thing.
Yep. Then you find out they can fly.
Yeah, when you find out they can fly. So then, because this is later in the book when that scene happens. So I love that, they're set up as, these almost unkillable creatures, and then Kelsa just, charges
the living crap out of one, and it knows his name.
Yeah.
So it sends chills down your spine, at least it did for me when I read that line. I was just like, holy crap, how badass does he have to be for one of the penultimate bad guys to be like, oh crap, it's him.
Yeah. And then when you do find out more of Kelset's backstory, you're just kind of man, he's
an awesome character.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that Brooks does very well, is some of his character development. You'll have just these characters that last half of a book, and you just fall in love with them. The way that they are perceived. Another favorite of mine's in one of the later books, a big burly guy in post-apocalyptic, right after the Great War, he finds a damn APC in like this southern person's like paranoid stash. The guy has bought like an APC and all these automatic weapons, and this dude from basically a future with no technology stumbles across it in his early 20s, if not late teens. Now he's in his 50s and has taught himself how to use all of it. And he takes this APC and goes up against an entire army of trolls by himself in the APC. And what Brooks does in all of his battle scenes is he's extremely descriptive on how it works, how all the gears are turning. And I got started on Brooks, so I need to stop because we'll be here for 4 more hours, and people won't want to listen to me ramble on about that.
I mean, that's kind of the whole point of this podcast, is just that, like, I wanted to have friends over and just have a good excuse to hang out and talk about things that we enjoy talking about, which again, for me and you, is usually always heavy metal and fantasy.
Yeah.
Because that's just, I feel like that's kind of how we really bonded after I first joined the table. Is I'd see like some of your
2-3 hour long conversations after games ended about the same stuff we're talking about now.
Yeah. Like a good 4-hour D&D game, like very story fantasy heavy, and then it's just kind of like, I got that idea because you tell me, but like, I got that idea for like this character from like Terry Brooks or another fantasy book. I'm like, do tell me more of this fantasy series you speak of.
Terry Goodkind, that book I gave you to check out, or handed you to check out, which you're welcome to at any time.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's another one where he is more, it's low fantasy based in realism. So somebody gets hurt, it's going to get infected. It's not going to have some magical healing balm that saves them, or the elves need to save him this time. That stuff's all well and good, but the creature they introduce as a small baddie in this book, like I was explaining the other night, rips through dozens of well-trained guards and mages in the first 20 pages of the book. And that actually is, going back to writing, what we were talking about earlier, that scene alone, after talking about it that night, made me rethink how I was going to do the introduction of my book. And that's kind of the idea I went with when illustrating how deadly things are in that world. So definitely would recommend the Terry Goodkind series. Wizard's First Rule, I think, is the first book. But I don't know what the name of the series is altogether. I think there's like 8 or 12 books in it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they're all 400 to 800 pages long. So it's a good bit of reading.
So yeah, if you're an avid reader, definitely check out, because again, I think the first Shannara book was like about 800.
726.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's... But yeah, it's a pretty good sized book. Cause I feel like average, most fantasy books, I feel like are around like 400 or 500.
Yeah.
And actually, like, just this year I reread The Lord of the Rings, which that's the first time I reread those books in a long time. A lot shorter than I remembered them. I think they're only like 400.
Well, hell, I mean, you read something like a Martin book.
Talking
about 800-900 pages.
Yeah, because again, the first Game of Thrones book is like, I think, right at 800, and all of them, or maybe it might have been 600. But basically, they progressively get like thicker and thicker and thicker to where I think like book 5, Dance of Dragons, is I think around. Let me just reach over here. Because I know it's around 1,000. So let me see here. So it looks like 1,051 pages.
Like the Wheel of Time books.
Yeah, because you loaned me the first Wheel of Time book because the same time you loaned me Shannara, and that was also around 600-700, I think.
Oh yeah, and that's another author. It's like Tolkien. He 3 chapters describing the sequence on a character's dress, but he did that so later on he can mention the significance of that sequence, and you're like, oh, that means that she's going to do X, Y, and Z, and that's going to be bad because she's awesome because she has these powers.
I think Robert Jordan did really well with like his magic system too, because that is one thing that that honestly I think is really hard with fantasy. Also coming from like someone who's an aspiring author myself, is trying to find out like the magic system and how it works in your world, because you don't want it to be too powerful to where it's just like, well, how come any magic user can't just like they're not ruling the world, so they can just fireball a castle and blow it up and stuff. So I think Robert Jordan does a really good job of like people are really powerful with magic, but there are limitations.
Yeah.
And I also like the duality of like the Aes Sedai have the warders. So basically, once they've expended their magic, the warders are like, okay,
To get them out.
yeah,
Yep.
you go rest, or like I'll hold them off, or yeah, they basically just they get them out of there.
The Aes Sedai, I love the take on the Matriarchal Society because the how Jordan does it with as much as everybody, especially that came up, in the 80s, we had strong male heroes like, you had your Arnold Schwarzenegger, you had Sylvester Stallone, Bruce Willis, all these big action guys. And then when you'd get a strong heroine, like the Red Sonja movie was fantastic. That opens your eyes to strong feminine characters, and Robert Jordan just took that and ran with it.
Yeah,
Because the Aes Sedai are basically, for those that aren't in the know, are the female magic users in this world. And they actually hunt down the men that can use magic because men ruined their side of magic. Like, it made it to where if a man uses that magic, it can make them, it will make them eventually go insane.
Yeah.
And they'll kill everybody around them. So the women have to hunt them down and sterilize them from using the magic. And once you realize why further in the books, at the beginning you're like, well, this isn't really fair. Give them a chance.
Yeah.
And as you progress in the books, you're like, oh no, don't give them a chance. Don't give them a chance. And it just, Jordan pulls that off. And I won't get into, political cues and all that right now, but it's
But I do think that
very
like
balanced.
that. Yeah, there's some authors that can write really good like female like characters, and same thing with George Martin. Like I think George Martin's great with characters in general. Like
House of the
great
Dragon
dialogue.
right now firmly illustrates how you can have extremely strong female protagonists
that don't always have to like be these swinging swords and stuff like that. They can just be a strong female character with just their presence, their dialogue, and the way they carry themselves.
Agreed.
Like most, and that is a lot of the female characters in like George Martin's work is outside of like bringing a Tarth and a handful of others. Most of the female characters, like even Cersei, you might hate her, but she is still a strong female character.
Oh yeah, Brienne of Tarth was awesome.
Yeah, and like
love
Gwendolyn
her
Christie was really everyone in that whole show was cast perfectly.
Yeah,
and
Tormund is still my favorite.
Oh yeah, I love Tormund. But
Going to marry her and have giant babies. The actor was perfect.
Yeah. But that is one thing that I think George Martin is. I think he's one of the best writers in terms of like having very well-rounded, fleshed out characters. No one's really one-dimensional. And again, even the characters who you despise, you still know why they are the way that they are. Like Cersei, you're kind of like, I hate
She's
this
been
woman.
twisted into what she is.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that the guy who played Joffrey had to drop out of his school.
Yeah.
Because people were threatening his life. And that means he's a hell of an actor.
Yeah, like testament to him being able to like pull off this despicable human being.
What was it, Ethan Hawke in Moon Knight? You hate him in that role. He's never played a villain, I don't think.
Not that I can think of.
Maybe a dark character here or there, but not an actual villain. And I love when good guys play bad guys. I mean, look at Robin Williams. Every bad guy character he played, from 1 Hour Photo to Insomnia, or even Death to Smoochie, every one of his bad guys was so well done. I'd love to see actors that are in usually the pretty boy or I'm trying to think, your sex appeal.
Yeah.
That are usually the white knight, shining armor, I like to see it when they all go bad, because that's usually some of the most ruthless bad guys you'll see in movies are those characters.
Yeah. And I also think it's it seems like a lot of times, like when you have actors like Alan Rickman who played a villain most of his career, everyone's like nice couldn't have met a nicer person. So it is kind of interesting that like all these people who are like play a lot of iconic villains, everyone's just kind of like sweetest person you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
Which again is a credit to their acting abilities, to where they could be like the nicest person, like give you the shirt off their back, but then it's like once the director says action, they go to a deep dark place and nail it. I
can't remember what movie it was, but the villain scared everyone on the set. It was children. Pennywise, the new It. So Skarsgård came on set, and they didn't show any of the children what he looked like before he came on set as it.
Oh, that was smart.
And he's notoriously tall
Yeah.
anyway, and he has that weird eye thing he can do. So those scares at the end of the first movie are genuine. They actually hadn't seen him before those scenes. And he apparently comes out of that fridge, and one of the young actors said he literally peed on himself. And they kept that in the movie.
Yeah.
But what he did in between takes after that is he was like, oh, look, I'm not trying to really scare you. And he would buy him like snacks and stuff and joke with them. But then it's the girl, I can't remember the actress's name now.
It's like Sophie something.
But there's that scene where he's picking her up and shaking her because she's not afraid of him. Apparently that really scared her. And then in between takes he'd be like, are you okay? Are you okay? I mean, just the same thing you were saying like about Alan Rickman. Like a lot of those actors are just great about like their interactions with the others on stage or on film. But, yeah.
Which, and I guess also kind of going back to Shannara, because I'm kind of curious because like I've kind of expressed a little bit of my thoughts on Rings of Power. Was that kind of the same thing with you for that first season of Shannara Chronicles? Because I haven't seen the show. Like I remember it coming out, but I didn't know it was based on a book or anything like that.
I was very disappointed that Brooks took the money from MTV to have that made.
Which that was also a weird choice too, like MTV of all.
Yeah, they made it like this teeny bopper, over-sexualized fantasy drama, and that's not what Shannara is.
Yeah.
And then they tried to shove. They didn't say anything about the first book other than things in passing. So I guess before I let myself go on a tirade, I was not happy as a reader with where they went. However, I know the audience they made it for. They were trying to bring or make fantasy hot and sexy for, at that time, the 20-somethings. I get that. I watched it. If you watch it completely from an objective standpoint, it's a decent show. What they did with Al-Anon, I can't remember that actor's name.
Manu Bennett.
Yeah, Manu Bennett is awesome. He should and always will be the perfect Deathstroke.
Yeah. And also he fits too with the way Al-Anon's described, because like Al-Anon's like this 7 foot or close to it, like 6'5" at least, big beefy dude,
but with an angular chiseled face. Got that, but with a pointed beard and kind of gangly. Manu Bennett's more beefy, which that's fine. That's fine. The way they portrayed him with all the runic stuff and all that was great. There were parts of it. The Elven King was great. Some of the lore was great. How they portrayed the demons was great. But the writing sucked.
So,
it was nowhere near the narrative. They could have done so much more with it because they basically took, we'll say, between Elf Sons of Shannara and Wish Song of Shannara, which is what they...
Which was the first one again? Was that
the first one's Sword?
Sword, okay.
This one basically takes place a quarter of the way through Elfstones. They took 2,000 pages of material and tried to shove it into
one season. Ooh, yeah, that's not a good idea. And
I watched it because I'm a Shannara fan.
Yeah.
Because even like with video games, I play video games because I enjoy playing video games. If a game's good, I'll play it and I'll give it a shot. I did the same thing with that. I sat down, I watched it. It was mostly terrible, but a lot of the ideas were sound. Could have been done much better, but I'm of the mindset of they should just revamp the whole damn thing and give it to give it to the brothers who did the Game of Thrones series and see what they can do with it, maybe.
Yeah. Because again, I obviously I didn't watch the show because it was on MTV. So that and maybe that's part of the problem too. Is I should have given it a watch because it was fantasy, but I was kind of like, it's on MTV. It's probably not. Again, not knowing anything about it, I was just kind of like, probably not going to be good because MTV hasn't been good since the early 2000s.
If it's not a 15-year-old that's pregnant, it's not going to work on MTV.
But yeah, so and I think because let's see, when did that first season come out? Because it wasn't that, maybe like 10, no, probably not even 10 years ago.
I have no idea. No idea. Because I didn't even watch it on MTV. I caught it on Netflix. It on Netflix for a while.
So we'll say it probably came out around like maybe 2014, 2015.
Probably.
So like fantasy was still popular because Game of Thrones was still going on at that point. But like I feel like right now, I think that show would do a lot better if they released it, whether it be like rebooted essentially.
Oh yeah.
Because with House of the Dragon, Rings of Power, and then all these other like fantasy shows and movies and stuff like that, and obviously D&D being as popular, like arguably more popular now in the last few years than it's ever been. It's like I feel like it would do a lot better if like another network picked up or a streaming service like a Netflix or something like that.
What I'm seeing right now is we're in the middle, or I would say the middle. We're at the tail end of about a 10-year life cycle of popularity for tabletop gaming. Most fads last between 5 and 12 years, depending on how much attention, how much it can evolve with everyone else. D&D in the next 2 years is going to come out with a new edition, which is going to not necessarily replace the old one, but update it. I think when that happens, hopefully we see another resurgence, but honestly, with how things trend, everything will probably fall off because people will be upset with the changes to the rules. And that'll start the decline in tabletop popularity again for another 5 or 10 years.
I can kind of see that happening, but at the same time, I feel like with and again, not just D&D, but like tabletop gaming in general becoming so popular. So even if D&D maybe like slips out of the cultural zeitgeist a little bit more, like I feel like tabletop gaming. So I feel like especially like people are collective generations because there's only like a 6-year difference between us, I think. Is there 37?
38.
38. Okay, so 7.
I'm an old fucker. Oh, sorry.
But I feel like people are collective generation. I feel like it's more popular because some of us are kind of jaded from like the overuse of technology, like cell phones and stuff like that, which are fine. But like when younger people, that's all they're glued to their phones, and it's kind of nice to just unwind, hang out with friends, and play like D&D or like the Alien RPG, which is incredible.
Yeah, that's a whole podcast worth itself.
Or even like Cards Against Humanity and like Trial by Trolley, like games like that are fun.
Well, I just used D&D is like the prime example because that's the one everyone identifies with. But I completely agree with you. Like, as it comes to tabletop gaming as a whole, I don't think the gaming's going to go anywhere. I should have elaborated a little bit more. It's more nerd culture as a whole, the fantasy thing. It actually is starting to get a little tired. That's why you're seeing more sci-fi start to come out. But one gives way to the other. It's a teeter-totter. And there are some things that have been done extremely well. But, I mean, being a nerd who came up seeing the first of the Dragonlance books be put out, seeing the Drizzt Do'Urden books come out, D&D 3rd edition being as popular as it was, playing that in high school and now being in my adult life and showing my kids how to play 5th edition. It's awesome. It's a great time to live. But like you're talking about everybody being on their phones. I'm seeing more and more kids aren't on their phones. My son will talk to his friends on his phone, but when he's out and about, he barely touches the damn phone.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's not just him. Like all of his friends, they may talk on them, but they're not surfing them constantly. Like when I graduated high school and I got my first cell phone, of course, and I'm not going to get into how old I feel talking about this, but like, you're happy to get a text message, or call me after 7 because minutes are free after 7.
Those are the days, kids. If you're younger than, probably even younger than me, and I'm not even that old. I'm only 31, but like that was kind of like even maybe a little after high school too.
Yeah. Why'd you call me before 7, bro?
Yeah,
you're burning my minutes.
Yes. Especially if you were like unemployed for a little bit, like I was after graduating high school. It's kind of like, no, please, no, I can't afford this.
Yeah, I can't afford that $50 card to replace 100 minutes on my phone. But now you have such a connection to everything at all times. It actually kind of desensitizes you to things that would have been a big deal. Which, I mean, that happens with every generation. But it's like, in my life, I took a break from playing music to be there for my family for a while, and then coming back into the scene and seeing how it has changed. It's awesome. Like the amount of technology that's out there, the things you can do with your devices now. But
yeah, you can. It's essentially like everything's a do-it-yourself. For everything, like for musicians, artists, like start your own business.
Click on a YouTube video, learn how to do it, and then practice it, do it well, charge for it. And You can do whatever you want. And learning how to play an instrument now, I paid for lessons. I quite literally dumpster dove because I couldn't afford to buy the magazines to learn how to play. I would dumpster dive behind our local CD shop, which some kids aren't even know what CDs are. Music store, I'll say, because they would throw out all the magazines from the month before. So I would fish out all the old guitar magazines, and that's how I taught myself how to play guitar.
Oh, wow.
And that's no joke. My friends literally laugh about some of the things that happened when we got caught. But that's how I learned, and now I could have saved myself all that time and trouble and actually had somebody physically show me how to play while having much more information available. So, yeah. And
you're currently working on putting out an EP, right, with your current band, correct?
Yep. And it's we are, as of last Tuesday, we've got 8 songs we're working on. Then there's also another project I'm helping out with. It's kind of like a, say, new wave 80s synth rock meets metal. Yeah, they asked me to help them out. They're old friends of mine. So it sounded like it would be fun. So got that going as well. And then a Tenacious D tribute project called Unstoppable P.
Nice. Have you all decided on a name yet? Because I know last time we spoke, you all were like basically going through like how you kept coming up with cool names, and the name was already taken.
Now we actually, speaking of Dune from earlier, my bass player James Shaney owns a tattoo shop called the White Rabbit here in Frankfurt.
Had like a good hour and a half long conversation with him one night at a local bar about like fantasy, heavy metal, sci-fi. Would not mind having him on the show either.
He is a band name factory, and they won't be names that you would ever think of. Like our first band together was called Shades of Judecca, and Judecca is one of the levels of Dante's Inferno, and the ghosts that resided in Judecca were like all damned for one reason or another. But the band name we came across, we were all talking about Dune, and the prison planet that the Emperor's Guard is trained on is called Seleucia Secundus, and that's the band name. We decided on that.
Nice.
So, very, very nerd and a very deep cut, but it just kind of fits our music. It's more atmospheric and like heavy when it needs to be, melodic when it needs to be, but
I don't even think I've asked, but like, do you all, like with this particular band, are you like a theme band or just kind of like whatever you write, that's basically the theme of that particular song? Okay.
Basically, we just jam around until we find something that works, and then send it to one another, and on rehearsal days we flesh it out and then keep going forward. Like if we have a song hammered out, make sure we run through those before we start writing new stuff, and it's looking like early spring we'll start actually playing out. We're going to do a couple of private, like, little parties and stuff like that beforehand, but that's about as far as we'll go before we're fully ready to jump out there. But when we go, we're going to have, we're looking at ordering merchandise right now, stickers, hats, t-shirts, booty shorts, underwear. Like,
I want to be the first one with those booty shorts.
I think our debut show, we're all going to be wearing them. So just as, have fun. But that's kind of at the root of everything. It's just to have fun. It's not overly serious. And going into the music side of things, away from the nerd side of things, what's awesome about the resurgence in metal right now is that when I first started playing professionally, it was all about, the young 20-somethings, new metal, you got to look this way, act this way, have this many tattoos. Because of the YouTube generation, the Spotify generation, Apple Music, you can upload one song on SoundCloud and then link that in a Reddit subgroup with 500,000 people in it, and guess who instantly got 500,000 fans?
That's a pretty smart way of going about it.
Post Malone. I may not care for his music, but I definitely can respect how he made it.
Oh, I didn't know that was like how he blew up.
He put his stuff on SoundCloud. He spent his last like $5 or $6 grand renting recording equipment and recorded 2 songs, put them up on SoundCloud, went to sleep, woke up with 3.5 million followers, and was a millionaire.
That is, I guess, like the dream for any a musician or anybody of any kind of craft to basically just put your stuff out there on a whim and then wake up. It's like, oh my God, wow.
Yeah, and I mean, don't quote me on the numbers specifically. Some of those may be exaggerations.
Even if you made like just $5,000, it's still the fact that like you went to
sleep broke with no job, woke up with money in the bank.
Again, that's that is the beauty of like the day that we live in now.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how your weight fluctuates. It doesn't matter your gender. And on that as well, having daughters, I think it's amazing. The new wave of female-fronted hard rock and metal. Much respect. I mean, much respect. There's so many great players that would have not gotten a chance unless metal had, stopped being such a boys' club. I've known so many phenomenal female musicians over my lifetime, and none of them got the attention that the guys did just because they weren't a guy, and that's not cool. Lita Ford, was one of the first big shred heads that deserved so much more recognition than she got. Then you have Joan Jett. I mean, I could go on and on, but now we've got
tons of great female vocalists, like
not just vocalists, just musicians in general. But yeah, that's another whole podcast that we could do.
So if you all want to hear all these potential episodes, just because this is kind of what I do for fun, so I'll gladly talk for like an hour or two about like just heavy metal or just fantasy or whatever. A little over an hour.
Wow.
Yeah. Which if you gotta go someplace, we can start wrapping up.
I'm just double checking. Okay. My phone went off a couple of times.
But yeah, again, kind of mentioned this before in I think the first episode that I released is pretty, playing fast and loose here with how I'm uploading and recording everything, just kind of playing it by ear, really. So, this episode, might go another couple weeks or something like that before I have another guest on. Just kind of depends. But hopefully you all have been enjoying this new iteration of the Pasty Pale Productions podcast, where it's
Pasty Pale Productions. That's awesome.
Yeah, because I'm Ghostly Pale. I produce things, so it's kind of like, there we go. That's the name of the channel. So, yeah.
You've heard of the PP. I'm the triple P.
P cubed.
Yep.
I think that's cubed with 3.
I'm not sure.
I'm not a math person, but yeah. So I personally haven't been enjoying this. So even if you hate this, I'm still gonna keep uploading because this is a good excuse for me to hang out with friends.
I'll come back again.
Yeah, anytime. Oh yeah. Since we've been going on a little over an hour, I guess we can go ahead and start wrapping this up. Do you want to promote your band page, where they can find you, social media and stuff like that?
Right now, we are solely on Facebook under Salusa Secundus. You're going to have to look up how to spell it, because you start typing anything in with Dune, or just type in Salusa, it's Selusa, you should find us. But there's nothing really up there. We're posting some practice videos every once in a while, but we're keeping it where we play it pretty close to the chest still. We don't want to fully put too much out there before we're all the way ready. So, anybody wants to give us a like, please do. We'll put out merch and all that here soon.
Also, you've got your 3D printing Imagination Studios.
Yep.
Spelled with an E, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Just look up Imagination Studios 502. That's got a page.
So if you need minis printed for your D&D campaign or any kind of tabletop game, this is the man to do it for pretty reasonable prices.
I've actually changed my prices recently to where each miniature printed that is a standard miniature, we're talking about like your nerds out there have your standard scale, like say Hero Forge mini, those are $5 a piece. For non-discriminate stuff, if you want a like Hero Forge mini printed, I do those for 10. And then like the more the size goes up and the time, of course, the charge goes up from there. But it's all pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I've bought stuff from before and think it's pretty reasonable. But yeah, so I guess that pretty much wraps up this episode of I don't know. I guess we could call ourselves Dice Rollers and Rock and Rollers, since that's been the overall theme of this episode. So yeah, hopefully you all have enjoyed. You can check out my Facebook page, Vlogging with Jake, where it's all about my travel vlogs, which in February I'm going to New Zealand, so definitely expect a lot of videos on the page then. And that's kind of the main thing I want to promote, and just do the typical YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, give me your firstborn child, and until next time, everyone, cheers.